The sun cracked the sky wide open that morning, bleeding light over the scorched Texas flatland. A crowd had gathered near the cotton sheds outside Garrison's Hollow, not for trade or fellowship, but for a thing worse than either: a quiet off-record sale. No poster, no auction block, just a man with a flask and a rope and a girl with dust in her hair and shackles on her ankles. She couldn't have been more than 12. She stood barefoot on the split boards of an old wagon bed, thin arms clasped tight behind her back. Her dress, if it could be called that, was nothing but burlap patched with twine. The crowd, mostly men, leaned on cane sticks and cracked knuckles, watching as the seller, a bent drifter with a sunburned neck, shouted, 12 years strong as a rabbit. Got all her teeth. Quiet, too. A few men grunted. One whistled. No one stepped forward. Then from the edge of the dry road a mule snorted. The crowd turned. A lone man sat slouched on its back coat, dusty hat pulled low, a scatter of beard on his jaw. Caleb Strickland. Folks knew him barely. He hadn't set foot in Garrison's Hollow in years, not since his wife died coughing blood in winter. Now he looked like a shadow. He eyed the girl. His voice cracked the heat. How much? The drifter squinted. $50. Caleb nodded once. Dismounted, reached into his coat, pulled out a folded envelope, his last sale from 2 steers, laid it in the dirt. The man took it, untied the girl, and walked away. No one spoke. No one stopped him. Caleb turned eyes like burned-out coals. The girl followed barefoot, shackled still. Mule man and child moved west, dust curling behind them like smoke from a long-dead fire. Caleb's ranch sat 30 miles past nowhere, pressed up against the dead hills like a scab on the land. The fence posts leaned like old men in wind. The barn had a hole in the roof big enough to let in a hawk. The well creaked at night as if whispering to ghosts. He hadn't touched the west field in 4 seasons, and the only thing still growing there was mesquite and cactus. His house, built by his father, sagged on the south side. The porch steps groaned when he climbed them. He tied the mule to the rail, not saying a word, and turned the latch. The girl stood behind him, silent. He nodded toward the door. She stepped inside. He didn't unshackle her, didn't speak either, just tossed a wool blanket on the floor near the hearth, struck a match, and lit the stove. She sat, legs tucked beneath her eyes, on nothing. Her name, he'd find out later, was Mina. That night he lay awake in his cot. Wind breathed through the boards. He stared at the ceiling, listening. She didn't cry, didn't shift, just breathed. Soft and steady, like she wasn't real. But Caleb had spent enough time with ghosts to know the difference. He remembered the smell of his wife's hair after rain, the feel of her fingers pressing the wound in his ribs when he came home from the war. She died with her hand in his, but he hadn't felt it. He was too numb, too hollowed. That was 8 winters ago. Since then, he'd only spoken to the preacher once and a cattle buyer twice. A man doesn't mean to become a ghost. He just stops getting in the way of the wind. Mornings came hard. The girl Mina rose before him. He heard the clink of metal as she poured water into the mule's trough, then the scrape of broom straw against dirt as she swept the porch. She didn't ask. She just did it. Like it was something owed. On the 3rd day, he brought out a small key and unlatched her shackles. They fell with a dull clang. She stared at him, blinked once, rubbed her wrists. You run free, he said flatly. But if you stay, you work. I got no room for charity. Mina looked at the hills beyond the fence, then down at her bare feet. She didn't speak. She picked up the broom again. Over weeks, the silence between them became a shape, thin but present. She patched a hole in the chicken coop with wire from a rusted trap. She polished the lantern glass. Once when he returned late from town, he found biscuits in the skillet, burnt but still warm. He didn't eat them, just looked, then sat down in the corner chair and stared at the fire for hours. At night, Mina sometimes touched the scar tissue on her back, flinching at nothing. Caleb never asked. He noticed the way she twitched when thunder rolled, or how her fingers curled tight when a coyote howled close. He'd seen that fear before. It didn't come from discipline. It came from beatings, measured, cruel ones. One morning, Caleb opened the cellar and brought up an old dress his wife used to wear for Sunday services. It hung in the back like memory. Ain't got nothing else for you, he muttered, leaving it on her cot. Mina didn't say thank you. She just held the faded cloth to her cheek and sat very still. That evening, when the sun sank low and gold dust washed the fields, Caleb lit a cigarette and stared past the fence line. The girl was mending the fence wire with a bent nail and string. He watched her for a long while, then said so low the wind nearly stole it, "Maybe the land ain't the only thing that's broken." The weeks curled into each other like old rope. The land stayed dry. Caleb stayed quiet, and Mina stayed. She never asked about her past, and Caleb never offered about his. But each day she grew a little taller, her limbs filling out with sun and chores. She spoke only when needed, yes, no, almost done. But there was a rhythm in her steps now, a kind of silent defiance in the way she carried the pail or chased off hawks from the hen house. She began whistling some days odd tunes with no melody, just breath through teeth, but it made the silence easier. On Sundays, she'd take the Bible from the shelf and dust it with care. She never read it aloud, just held it open in her lap like it still held the voice of someone she missed. One cold morning in October, Caleb caught her standing by the far fence, her hand resting on the mule's shoulder. He watched from the porch, arms crossed. "She don't like folks much," he said. Mina didn't turn. "She don't bite me," she said back. It was the first full sentence she'd spoken. Caleb stared surprised, then gave a soft grunt. "Guess that's something." That evening she asked if she could cut the mule's mane. It hung long and matted. He handed her his old shears, watched her work in the dying light with the care of someone doing more than grooming an animal, someone trying to tame something wilder than herself. Winter scraped its way in. Frost came hard and early. Caleb's boots split along the seams and Mina stitched them with pig sinew and thread. He didn't ask her to. She just took them from the porch rail, worked by lantern light, and left them back at the door by morning. When he slipped them on, the fit was tighter but warm. "You sew?" he asked gruffly. She shrugged. "My ma taught me." "Before?" Caleb nodded slowly. The word ma sat in the air like a ghost. In January, the mule got sick, fevered and twitching. Caleb knew the signs there wouldn't be a sunrise after it. He sat up with the animal all night, rubbing its neck, whispering things he hadn't said in years. At some point, Mina came out wrapped in the blanket he'd given her that first night. She sat beside him, pressed her forehead to the mule's shoulder, said nothing, just stayed. When the mule stopped breathing, Caleb reached for the shovel, but Mina took it from him. "Let me dig," she said. He didn't stop her. The ground was hard as iron, her hands bled. After they buried it, she placed a small rock on the grave. She wasn't scared, she said. Not at the end. Caleb wiped the sweat from his brow. "Ain't many of us die unscared." Mina looked at him for a long moment. "Maybe it helps if someone's with you." The next night, Caleb brought out his old deck of cards. His wife used to beat him at poker with a grin on her face. He shuffled them slow, sat across the table. Mina eyed the cards, cautious. "Know how to play?" he asked. She nodded once, a little. Her eyes didn't match her voice. They were older, worn out in ways no child should be. He dealt the hand. They played in silence except for the crackle of fire and the occasional flick of cards. When she won the third hand, she gave a flicker of a smile, small, almost broken, but it lit the room more than the lantern. That night, Caleb lay in bed and stared at the ceiling again. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The wind shifted in March, not just in weather, but in spirit. Dogs barked longer at night. Mail came late, if at all. And smoke began rising from places it shouldn't. Caleb noticed the signs the way a man does when he's seen war before. Hoofprints near the creek that didn't match any ranch horse. A butchered steer left gutted and wasted on McAllen's land. And one morning he found a dead rabbit nailed to his fence post. Not warning, not prank. Ritual. Mina watched his jaw tighten day by day. "What is it?" she asked finally. Caleb didn't answer right away. He leaned over the porch rail, arms stiff. Trouble. She didn't push, but she kept the axe near the woodshed and a hammer under her cot. 2 nights later, Jeremiah Lorne rode into the yard without warning, blood on his shirt, one eye swollen shut. He barely got the words out before falling from his horse. "They're back," he gasped. "Ezra Kane. He's got boys, 6, maybe more." Caleb dragged him inside, poured whiskey in the wounds. Lorne's hands trembled. "He's burning ranches. Asking about you." Caleb froze. Lorne nodded. "Says you got something he wants. Something from back in the war. Gold. Confederate stash." Caleb swore under his breath. That was a ghost he thought he'd buried. Ezra Kane had been his partner during the final stretch of the war, sharpshooter tracker, loyal in his own lawless way. But after the surrender, things changed. Looting was rampant. Rumors flew about hidden gold wagons lost in the swamps. Caleb and Ezra found one half buried in mud, guarded by deserters. They fought, took what they could, but Kane wanted all of it, killed 2 men to claim the rest. Caleb stopped him, shot him in the leg, left him bleeding, never saw him again, until now. "He thinks I took it," Caleb muttered. "Thinks I buried it here." Lorne's eyes flicked to the girl. "You got a kid now." Caleb didn't answer, just stood, stared into the fire. He won't ask again. Next time he'll just take. By morning, Lorne was gone, too scared to stay. Caleb boarded the windows, reinforced the doors, gave Mina a hunting knife, and showed her where the rifles were buried under the porch. "If I say run, you run. You hear me?" She nodded, silent. "You know how to shoot." She shook her head. He handed her a pistol anyway. Time to learn. Days passed without incident. Then one dusk, smoke rose from the Tucker Ranch. By nightfall, word came burned to the ground. No survivors. The sheriff had gone east. Town was scared, silent. Ezra Kane's gang, now called the Red Knives, roamed free. They rode with red cloths tied to their arms, axes on their saddles, burned and buried their way across the map. On the 6th night, Caleb saw a rider near the edge of the property, just watching. Then gone. Mina didn't sleep. She stood guard while Caleb tried to fix the broken latch on the barn door. She asked once, "Did you really take gold?" He looked at her deadpan. "No." She believed him. "Then why's he coming?" Caleb lit a cigarette with trembling hands. "'Cause men like Kane ain't after truth. They're after stories, and they think blood's the way to finish them." 2 mornings later, they found the barn door slashed open. Chickens gone, horses spooked, a red cloth nailed to the post. Caleb stared at it a long while, then walked to the porch, dropped to his knees, and dug under the 3rd board. Pulled out a long cloth-wrapped bundle, his Sharps rifle, still oiled, still heavy. Mina watched him from the steps. "You going after him?" she asked. "I'm not waiting for him to come here," he said. She stepped closer. "I want to come." He shook his head. "You're a child." Her jaw clenched. "I ain't been one for a long time." That night, under cover of dark, he packed jerky cartridges, water, and maps. Drew a circle around Kane's old haunts, rock gulches, dried creeks, the Sulphur Canyon where they once camped. He kissed the Bible once the same way he had the day his wife died. Then he turned to Mina. "You know where the shotgun is." She nodded. "If I don't come back, you ride west. Don't stop till you see the river." She said nothing, just stared at him with eyes like dark coals burning steady. Before sunrise, he rode out. He found them in the canyon just like he guessed. 6 men around a campfire. Kane sat in a chair like a king of dust. Scar down his jaw, silver tooth glinting. Caleb didn't wait. He raised the Sharps, fired once, dropped 1 man clean. Then all hell broke loose. The rest of that battle would be told different ways for years. Some say he killed 3 before he fell. Some say Mina rode in shooting like an outlaw's daughter. Some say the wind turned and carried Kane's scream a mile wide. But the truth was blood, fire, and grit, and it left Caleb crawling in the ash. The canyon stank of sulfur and smoke. Caleb's coat was half burnt, his left arm numb from shoulder to wrist. Blood trickled from a graze on his temple. He'd lost his hat somewhere in the chaos, and his boots slipped on shale as he dragged himself behind a dead horse. Bullets had stopped flying, but he could still hear the echo of screams. The final desperate shots and Kane's voice shouting through the haze. "You think you can crawl back from the grave, Caleb?" The fire crackled from the edge of the ridge where one of Kane's boys had fallen into the brush with a lit torch. Flames had caught quick, racing up the dry slope. Caleb's fingers closed around the cold metal of the Sharps. Only 1 round left. He rolled to his belly and breathed shallow. Somewhere above, hooves clattered. Fan-out Kane barked. Find him. I want that bastard's heart in my hand. Caleb knew he wouldn't survive. His leg was shot through. His rifle barrel was cracked. The sun had nearly set, casting everything in red. Like the world had bled out. He crawled higher into a crevice where the air was cooler and waited. Listened. Then footsteps. Boots scraping stone. 2 of them. Laughing. One said, "Ain't no gold here. Just dust and a dead fool." The other chuckled. "Kane'll skin us if we come back empty." They rounded the corner and paused. Caleb didn't aim. He just fired. One fell back screaming. The other stumbled, shouting for Kane. That was when Caleb's strength gave out. He collapsed against the stone, breath and body shaking. In the distance, Kane's voice boomed, "He's close. Take him alive. I want to watch him choke." And then something strange. A whistle, high and sharp, not from a man. It came again. Then a shot. Close, too close, and another. Caleb blinked, trying to lift his head. Then he saw her. Mina, standing 10 feet above, rifle in hand, face pale as bone. She fired again, hitting the rocks near Kane's men. "Get away from him," she shouted. Her voice cracked, but the sound was pure steel. One man turned to charge her. She shot him in the leg. Caleb reached up weakly. "Run," he rasped. "Mina, you run." But she didn't. She moved down the slope, staying behind cover, dragging the second rifle Caleb had buried weeks ago. Kane's men scattered, not used to being hunted. Kane emerged last. Tall, gaunt, gray hair tied in a string. He wore a Confederate officer's coat, yellowed with time, and held a cavalry saber like it still had meaning. His eyes fell on Mina. He laughed low and cruel. "What's this?" he said. "Your little orphan come to die with you." Mina raised the rifle. Her hands were shaking. Kane stepped closer. "You think you know him, girl? He's a thief. A liar. He left me to rot in blood. He'd do the same to you." Mina didn't flinch. "He never laid a hand on me. Never lied. That makes him better than you'll ever be." Kane's smile faded. He swung the saber in a slow arc. "I killed men stronger than you with less talk." He lunged. Mina fired, missed. Kane knocked the rifle from her hands, kicked her in the ribs. She crumpled, gasping. Caleb shouted, forced himself up, teeth gritted. Kane turned back to him, grinning like a jackal. "You look like hell, Strickland, and you smell like it," Caleb spat. Kane walked toward him, saber dragging. "Where's the gold?" Caleb chuckled through the blood. "All gone, Ezra. Long before you got here." Kane raised the blade. "Then you're no use to me at all." He swung. A shot rang out. Kane froze, then looked down. Blood poured from a hole in his chest. Behind him, Mina stood holding Caleb's revolver. Hands steady, face like stone. "Don't touch him," she said. Kane staggered, dropped the saber. Looked at her once more, not with rage but confusion. Like the ending didn't make sense to him. Then he fell face first into the ash. The ridge went quiet. Only the crackling fire and Mina's breath remained. She dropped the gun, rushed to Caleb. His face was pale, cold sweat on his brow. She tore her coat, pressed it to his wound. "You're not dying," she whispered. "Not after all this." Caleb touched her hand. "You came." She nodded, crying now. "Course I did." Later, when the fire had burned low and night fell hard over the canyon, she helped him onto a horse they'd stolen from Kane's men. She rode behind, holding him up, guiding the reins with trembling fingers. The trail back was long. The moon hid behind clouds. Wolves howled from the ridge, but they didn't come close. They returned to the ranch near dawn. The front steps looked the same, the porch still leaning. She helped him inside, laid him on his cot, and stoked the fire. He drifted in and out of sleep for 2 days. Fever took him. She fed him broth and whiskey, changed the dressing on his wound. On the 3rd day, he opened his eyes. "You stayed," he whispered. Mina nodded, eyes red with exhaustion. "I ain't going anywhere." Outside, the sky had turned soft with spring rain. The land, even in its scars, seemed to breathe again. 2 weeks passed in the hush that follows fire. Caleb didn't speak much, and Mina didn't ask. She rose early, boiled water, split kindling, and kept a rifle by the door. A neighbor came by Thomas Greeley from 2 ridges over. He didn't ask about the smoke or the gunshots. Just dropped off some flour, said heard things. Don't know what's true, but if Kane's gone, I reckon someone finally did right by this place. Then he tipped his hat to Mina, and for the first time called her by name. Caleb healed slow. On the 9th day, he managed to sit up without help. He looked thinner than ever, his cheekbones, sharp eyes hollowed, but there was fire behind them again. He called her over that evening, gestured to the chair by the hearth. You got a story I never asked about, he said quietly. You don't owe it, but I'm listening. Mina hesitated. Then with her hands folded tight, she spoke. The man who sold her that day at the field hadn't owned her. She didn't even know his name. He'd found her weeks after she'd killed the one who did. That man, a cotton boss named Breacher, had taken her after her parents died in the sickness. She'd been 9. He beat her, made her pick fields till her fingers bled, locked her in the shed when she disobeyed. One night when he was drunk and slow, she stole his knife and sank it into his throat. Didn't wait to see if he died. Just ran. For 2 days she hid in hay wagons, stables, under porches. Then the drifter caught her, said he'd take her back, but didn't. Instead, he saw a chance to make coin by pretending to sell a slave. I didn't scream, she whispered. Figured dying was easier than going back. Caleb didn't speak, just leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Why me, he asked. Why'd you follow me that day? She shrugged. You looked like you'd already lost everything. I thought maybe you wouldn't take anything from me. He let out a long breath. I didn't save you, Mina. I bought a ghost I didn't understand. She looked at him dry-eyed. Maybe I wasn't for saving. Maybe I just needed someone who wouldn't throw me away. Word of Kane's death spread like prairie fire. Most folks were glad, though none said it outright. The red knives vanished after that night. 2 were found dead in the canyon. Another hanged himself in a jail upstate. The rest scattered. But justice is never clean, not in a town like Garrison's Hollow. By May, the sheriff came knocking. He had papers in his hand. Rumor says you bought a child, he said, not looking Caleb in the eye. Others say she's a killer. Either way, questions need answers. Caleb stood stiff from healing. Mina was in the barn tending the mule they'd rescued. She wasn't sold, Caleb said. She was escaping. That man had no right to her. The sheriff sighed. And yet you paid for her. I paid to end a cruelty, Caleb said, voice low. Not to own it, the sheriff scratched his chin. Law don't like gray things. Makes folks nervous. Caleb leaned on the post. You want to take her, you'll need more than paper, and you'll have to go through me. The sheriff stared at him, saw the rifle resting by the door, the half-healed wound in his side, the way he stood like a man willing to bleed again. Then he folded the paper and tipped his hat. Far as I'm concerned, she's just another hand on your ranch. Don't make trouble. Caleb nodded. We won't. That night, Caleb told Mina everything. About the gold, the canyon, Kane's betrayal, the war, the days when he believed violence was glory and revenge was justice. I shot a man over a rumor, he said, and left another to die in the dirt. Turns out neither of them had the gold. I never found it. Never looked again. Mina asked if you had found it, what would you have done? Caleb stared at the flames, buried it. Let it rot. Some things kill slower than bullets. She took his hand then for the first time, held it not like a child clinging to safety, but like someone grounding a soul on the edge of breaking. In town, whispers spread. Some called Caleb a fool for taking in a girl like her. Others said she saved his life. A few still believed he'd hidden the gold, but no one came for them. Fear is a funny shield when it's earned the right way. One day a young boy from town asked Mina if she was Caleb's daughter. She looked over at the old man cleaning tack, then smiled faintly. Something like that, she said. By the time summer turned the fields golden, they'd built a new pen for goats, repaired the barn roof, and strung a bell above the porch, a small copper one Caleb found buried in the cellar, still polished from when his wife used it to call him in from the fields. At night, sometimes Mina would sit beneath that bell, turning it gently with her finger. She'd think of the day he lifted his hand at the field and changed both their lives, not with pity, not with power, but with a broken kind of hope, the kind that still grows even in drought. Years passed like dust on the wind, quiet, slow, unnoticed, until it layered everything. The ranch didn't become rich. It didn't become famous, but it lived. Fences stood straighter, animals fattened, grass returned in stubborn patches. Mina ran it all, calm and watchful, her voice low like Caleb's had been. She grew taller, leaner, with hands strong from labor and eyes that carried a kind of stillness that unnerved men used to noise. Caleb lived long enough to see her turn 16, then 20. He taught her how to read the land, how to treat a colicky foal, how to skin a rattler clean without wasting the meat. He laughed only twice that she could remember, but once was when she beat him at cards without bluffing. The other was the night they buried the old mule side by side in the field under a cross made from splintered porch rail. He passed one autumn morning with his boots on and his hat over his eyes, sitting on the porch like he'd fallen asleep watching the trees rustle gold. Mina found him with the fire still warm behind him. She didn't cry right away. Just sat down beside him, hand on his arm. Let the silence fall like a blanket. The funeral was small, just her Greeley and the preacher's boy. She buried him under the same cedar where his wife had been laid, planted sagebrush and left the Bible he always kept on the mantel. His rifle stayed above the door untouched. She took over the ranch fully after that. Folks started calling it the Strickland place again. No one asked who she was anymore. Some thought she was a niece, others a foundling. A few whispered about the past, about the red knives, about Cain. But the talk faded. All they saw was a woman who knew her land and didn't flinch at thunder. The copper bell still hung from the porch. Every morning she rang it, once soft and short. Not as a call, but as a memory. When the wind blew just right, you could hear it clear to the hills. One summer, a rider from out east came through looking for a place to trade horses. He sat across from Mina with dust in his teeth and pride in his boots. He asked her if the rumors were true that this place was once saved by a girl no bigger than a thistle and a man with a broken gun. Mina didn't answer, just handed him a glass of water and a piece of salt bread. The man chuckled. "You don't talk much, do you?" She met his eyes. Not when silence says more. When he left, he tipped his hat to the bell. Said he liked the sound of it. Children in town sometimes asked if it was true she used to be chained, that Caleb bought her like a mule. She didn't scold them, just smiled faintly and told them this: "He didn't buy me. He saw me. That's different." And when storms rolled in heavy from the west, when the sky bruised and the wind sang, she'd light the stove, pour 2 cups of coffee, and set one across from her at the table, just in case he walked back in from the ridge covered in dust and time. One late evening under a silver sky, Mina climbed the porch and rang the bell once. The sound carried out over the fields like a whisper from the past. In the fading light, a hawk circled high above the cedar grove where Caleb slept. She watched it rise, steady, untouchable. Below, the ranch held steady in the wind. No gold hidden beneath it. No reward but the life built on it. Just a girl no one wanted and a man who'd lost everything, finding each other in a place where nothing was left. And making it enough. The bell rang again.